I bought the dam holding back the HOA's lake. Then they learned who opens the gates, who really controls what happens next when someone owns the dam. And why would discovering who opens the gates change everything? Hello everyone, and welcome back to the channel. We are excited to have you here for another unforgettable story that will keep you guessing until the very end. If you enjoy compelling stories filled with unexpected twists, please subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss a new episode. Thank you for your incredible support and for spending your time with us today. Before we begin, let us know in the comments where you are watching from anywhere in the world and what time it is there right now. Now, let us begin the story. People think a lake belongs to the people standing beside it, but they forget to ask who controls the water. The first rays of sunlight shimmered across the calm surface of Willow Ridge Lake as music drifted through the cool Texas morning, blending with the distant laughter of homeowners gathering for what Linda Parker proudly called the beginning of a new era for our neighborhood. White tents lined the shoreline, colorful banners fluttered in the breeze, and volunteers arranged folding chairs while children tossed breadcrumbs toward ducks gliding across water that looked almost too perfect to be real. A polished wooden stage overlooked the lake, where Linda stood in a tailored navy blazer greeting residents with the confident smile that had become her signature during every homeowners association event. Behind her hung a massive illustration of future walking trails, expanded docks, and elegant picnic areas that would transform the shoreline into the centerpiece of the community. Everyone applauded as she described the lake as the crown jewel of the neighborhood. Everyone except me. I was standing nearly 200 feet above the celebration on top of the old concrete dam that had quietly held back millions of gallons of water for more than 60 years. The breeze carried the scent of fresh cedar, damp earth, and still water as I rested one hand against the weathered steel railing overlooking the spillway. Beneath my boots, the concrete remained solid despite decades of changing seasons. The structure was never beautiful. It was never photographed for neighborhood brochures or featured in glossy newsletters. Most residents barely noticed it existed. They admired the sparkling lake below while ignoring the one structure that made the lake possible in the first place. I looked down toward the shoreline and watched Linda raise her hands to welcome another round of applause from the crowd. Contractors, board members, real estate agents, and new homeowners smiled proudly as cameras captured another celebration of what they believed belonged entirely to the association. I quietly slipped my phone from my jacket pocket and recorded the entire event without saying a single word. Every speech, every promise, every statement about ownership deserved to be remembered exactly as it was spoken. A pickup truck rolled slowly across the maintenance road leading to the dam before stopping near the control building that sat beside the massive gate mechanisms. The driver glanced toward me with a polite wave before continuing his inspection route. Few people ever visited this side of the property. There were no picnic tables, no fishing docks, and no scenic overlooks here. Only weathered machinery, maintenance logs, heavy steel gates, and decades of engineering quietly doing their job every single day. That was exactly why I had chosen to spend the morning here instead of attending the celebration below. I watched sunlight slowly spread across the water until the entire lake reflected the bright blue Texas sky like polished glass. It was a peaceful scene, almost enough to convince someone that everything beneath the surface was just as calm. But I knew something the cheering crowd did not. The shoreline could host every celebration they wanted. The association could pass every rule they imagined. Linda could call the lake the heart of the neighborhood as many times as she pleased. None of that changed the simple truth hidden upstream. Nobody at that celebration had bothered to ask who actually owned the dam. And nobody there realized that only one signature determined when those massive steel gates stayed closed, when they opened, and who had the legal authority to make that decision. As the applause echoed across the water, I stayed where I had always felt most at home, beside weathered steel instead of polished speeches. The old control house behind me was no larger than a single-car garage, built from thick concrete walls that had faded beneath decades of Texas sun. Most homeowners assumed it stored maintenance equipment, but my father had spent enough afternoons inside that little building to know every lever, every pressure gauge, and every handwritten inspection record resting inside its metal cabinets. When I was 10 years old, he brought me here for the first time instead of taking me fishing like every other father seemed to do. I remember complaining because I wanted to be down at the lake with everyone else. He simply smiled, unlocked the heavy steel door, and handed me a flashlight. The room smelled of machine oil, old paper, and damp concrete. Sunlight slipped through narrow windows, reflecting across polished valve wheels that looked enormous to a child. My father rested one hand on one of the control mechanisms and said something I never fully understood until many years later. People admire the water because they can see it. Smart people learn what keeps it here. At the time, I thought he was simply teaching me about engineering. Every summer afterward became another lesson. While other families rented kayaks or planned neighborhood picnics beside the shoreline, we walked inspection routes across the crest of the dam. He showed me expansion joints running through the concrete, drainage channels carrying away rainwater, emergency spillway elevations, and the massive steel gates that quietly regulated the lake's level through every season. He carried a worn leather notebook filled with dates, measurements, sketches, and maintenance observations that stretched back farther than I could imagine. Every page was written in careful block letters, never rushed, never incomplete. He believed that good records prevented bad surprises. Sometimes we sat together overlooking the reservoir while he explained why structures like this outlived the people who built them. He never spoke about ownership with pride. Instead, he spoke about responsibility. A lake gives people beautiful memories, he once told me while watching the afternoon sunlight shimmer across the water. A dam gives them the chance to make those memories safely. As I grew older, those quiet weekends became less about concrete and machinery and more about understanding patience. My father never raised his voice. He never argued with neighbors or boasted about what he knew. He simply believed that every important answer could eventually be found inside maps, maintenance logs, engineering drawings, and recorded history if someone cared enough to look. Even after the subdivision expanded around the lake and new homes replaced open pasture, he continued making his regular inspections with the same steady routine. New residents admired the shoreline, organized fishing tournaments, and celebrated property values without ever asking how the lake had existed long before the first neighborhood street was paved. Standing on the crest of the dam that morning, I found myself hearing my father's voice more clearly than the celebration below. Linda Parker's speech drifted upward across the water as another round of applause rolled through the crowd, but those sounds faded behind a memory that refused to leave me. Just before he passed away, my father placed his weathered notebook into my hands and quietly said, "If people ever forget to look upstream, they will eventually misunderstand everything downstream." At the time, I believed he was sharing another lesson about maintenance. I would soon discover he had been preparing me for something far greater than keeping a dam in good condition. The celebration beside the lake ended before noon, but Linda Parker was nowhere near finished. By early afternoon, she was already walking the shoreline with architects, contractors, and several members of the Homeowners Association board, pointing toward open sections of grass where new projects would soon begin. From the top of the dam, I watched them stop every few minutes while someone unrolled large engineering drawings across the hood of a white pickup truck. Even from that distance, I could recognize the bright blue site plans showing expanded walking trails, additional fishing docks, decorative lighting, an outdoor pavilion, and a broad stone plaza overlooking the water. Linda spoke with the confidence of someone who believed every detail had already been settled. Her gestures were precise, her smile never faded, and every sentence seemed to end with another promise about increasing property values and creating a destination that would attract future homeowners. The people around her nodded with excitement. They looked at the lake and imagined weddings, summer festivals, paddleboard rentals, and holiday fireworks reflecting across the water. Nobody looked uphill. Nobody looked toward the weathered concrete structure that quietly made every one of those dreams possible. Over the next several weeks, the neighborhood changed almost every day. Survey crews marked fresh utility routes with bright orange paint. Landscaping companies measured future garden beds along the shoreline. Contractors installed temporary fencing around work areas, while heavy equipment arrived before sunrise to prepare new access roads. The association newsletter proudly featured colorful renderings of what Linda called the Lake District Improvement Project. Every issue described another phase of development, another amenity, another reason residents should celebrate the future. My mailbox filled with glossy brochures showing smiling families beside sparkling water beneath headlines promising a new chapter for the community. Not one page mentioned the dam. Not one illustration included the control house or the spillway. It was as though the lake had simply appeared by itself. One afternoon, Linda spotted me walking along the maintenance road near the crest of the dam and crossed the grass with the same polished confidence she displayed during every board meeting. "Beautiful view from up here," she said with a friendly smile. I agreed. It had always been beautiful. She unfolded one of the project renderings and held it toward me. The illustration showed elegant stone pathways wrapping around nearly the entire shoreline. "This area is finally becoming everything it was meant to be," she said proudly. "The lake is the center of our community now." I studied the drawing for a moment before handing it back. "It certainly looks impressive," I replied. She seemed pleased by my response, perhaps expecting disagreement that never came. Before walking away, she added, "Once everything is complete, everyone will understand how important this place really is." I watched her return to the architects while those words settled quietly in my mind. She was right about one thing. Everyone would eventually understand how important this place really was. They simply did not understand which place mattered most. That evening, I unlocked the small control building for the first time in months. Dust floated through narrow beams of sunlight as I slowly opened metal cabinets containing inspection logs, engineering manuals, maintenance records, and faded original drawings carefully preserved by previous operators. My father's worn notebook still rested on the same shelf where he had left it years earlier. I ran my hand across the cover before placing it beside the older records. Outside, the lake reflected another peaceful Texas sunset, while homeowners admired the shoreline below. Inside, surrounded by decades of carefully preserved documents, I realized the most valuable part of the entire property had never been the water everyone could see. It had always been the quiet responsibility hidden behind one locked steel door that almost nobody remembered existed. The following Monday began like every other workday around the lake, except I had already made the most important decision before sunrise. Instead of renewing the temporary maintenance agreement my father had kept for years, I completed the final documents transferring full ownership of the dam, the control building, the spillway structures, the mechanical gate system, and every recorded maintenance easement from the original family trust into my name. The closing took less than an hour inside a quiet law office 20 miles away. There were no reporters, no celebration, and certainly no interest from anyone connected to the homeowners association. To everyone else, it looked like another routine real estate transaction involving an aging piece of infrastructure that most people never noticed. That was exactly why the opportunity had existed in the first place. The family that originally constructed the dam decades before had retained ownership of the structure even after selling the surrounding land in separate transactions over many years. The subdivision eventually grew around the lake, but the legal ownership of the dam itself remained entirely separate from the shoreline, parks, and residential lots. It was an unusual arrangement, yet every deed, easement, and recorded survey confirmed the same history. My father had known the original owners well enough to help them with inspections after retirement, but he had never been in a position to purchase the property himself. Before he passed away, he quietly told me that if the opportunity ever appeared, I should never ignore it. I finally understood why. After signing the last page, the attorney handed me a neatly organized folder containing certified copies of the recorded deed, easement agreements, maintenance responsibilities, engineering records, and operational rights associated with the structure. He smiled politely before saying, "Congratulations. You now own one of the most important pieces of property around this entire lake." I thanked him, placed the folder beside my father's weathered notebook on the passenger seat, and drove back toward the ridge without mentioning the purchase to anyone. During the following weeks, nothing about my routine changed. Every morning, I inspected the crest of the dam exactly as my father had taught me. I checked drainage channels after rainstorms, noted water elevations inside the reservoir, photographed the condition of the gate mechanisms, and entered observations into the same style of maintenance log he had kept for decades. Down below, Linda Parker continued expanding the association's plans with the confidence of someone convinced every important decision had already been made. Contractors measured shoreline improvements while survey stakes multiplied across open fields. New announcements appeared inside residents' mailboxes describing future community events beside the lake. I received the same newsletters as everyone else and carefully saved every copy inside a growing file cabinet. Every brochure praised the beauty of the water. None acknowledged the structure controlling it. One afternoon, I noticed a fresh sign installed near the entrance to the lakeside park reading, "Property managed by Willow Ridge Homeowners Association." Residents stopped to admire it, taking photographs beside flower beds newly planted for the upcoming summer season. I simply looked uphill toward the weathered control building standing quietly against the blue Texas sky. The sign was technically accurate about the park, but it said nothing about the dam beyond the trees. I folded another newsletter into my folder beside the newly recorded deed and realized something almost amusing. Linda believed she was steadily expanding her authority around the lake. In reality, every new project, every public announcement, and every additional investment made one simple fact more significant than ever before. The larger the association's plans became, the more valuable the quiet concrete structure upstream had quietly become under my name. Life around the lake became strangely predictable after I completed the purchase, and that predictability worked entirely in my favor. Every week, the Homeowners Association introduced another policy affecting the shoreline. New parking restrictions appeared beside the boat launch. Fishing hours were adjusted. Event permits became mandatory for community gatherings. Temporary fences redirected foot traffic while contractors prepared additional improvements. Linda Parker confidently explained every new regulation during board meetings, presenting each decision as another step toward protecting the neighborhood's most valuable asset. Residents generally supported her because the projects looked organized and well-planned. They saw cleaner walking paths, freshly planted trees, decorative lighting, and expanding recreational areas. From their perspective, the association was simply doing what it was supposed to do. I attended nearly every meeting without saying much. My father always believed that people reveal the most important information when they think nobody is paying close attention. I carried a small notebook into every session and quietly recorded dates, project announcements, budget approvals, engineering updates, and every statement describing who controlled the lake. Whenever presentation slides appeared on the large screen, I carefully photographed them before they disappeared. Public meeting minutes were posted online a few days later, and I downloaded every copy before filing them beside my maintenance logs and property records. At first glance, the documents seemed ordinary, but together they formed a timeline showing how the association consistently described the lake as though every important part of it existed entirely within their authority. One Saturday morning, I noticed survey crews installing additional markers along the shoreline near one of the planned observation decks. Curious, I walked over and introduced myself to the project engineer. He was friendly, answered several general questions about the construction schedule, and mentioned that every design had been developed around maintaining a stable water elevation throughout the year. I smiled politely because that single sentence quietly connected another piece of the puzzle. Stable water levels were not created by walking trails, landscaping, or neighborhood policies. They depended upon the operation of the dam sitting quietly upstream. Later that afternoon, I climbed back to the control building and opened the heavy steel door. The familiar scent of machine oil and aging paper greeted me just as it had since childhood. I unlocked one of the filing cabinets and removed the original hydraulic operating manual prepared when the dam first entered service decades earlier. Inside were detailed diagrams explaining seasonal gate adjustments, emergency overflow procedures, inspection requirements, and maintenance schedules. Every page emphasized that careful operation protected both the reservoir and every property surrounding it. The responsibility described in those documents was remarkably clear. Ownership of the structure carried legal obligations that extended far beyond simply possessing concrete and steel. I scanned every page into digital form, creating secure backups alongside the certified deed, easement agreements, inspection records, and engineering drawings I had already preserved. By the end of the evening, my archive had grown into something far more complete than I had originally imagined. It no longer documented only ownership. It documented responsibility, operational authority, historical continuity, and the practical relationship between the dam and the lake everyone admired below. As I locked the control building before sunset, I looked across the calm water reflecting orange light beneath the Texas sky. Families were still fishing from the docks, children were laughing along the shoreline, and Linda was speaking with contractors near the future pavilion. Everything appeared perfectly ordinary. Yet every new rule the association adopted, every improvement they announced, and every investment they celebrated quietly reinforced the same overlooked reality. They continued managing the shoreline with complete confidence, while the one system capable of sustaining the lake remained under the stewardship of someone they still believed was simply another homeowner. Several weeks later, the first unexpected letter arrived in my mailbox. It carried the Homeowners Association logo across the top and announced a mandatory coordination meeting regarding future improvements affecting the Lake District. The language sounded friendly, but every sentence assumed the association already understood every important part of the project. I folded the letter neatly, placed it inside my growing archive, and attended the meeting exactly as requested. Linda Parker welcomed everyone with the same confident smile she had worn since the first celebration beside the lake. Large presentation boards filled the room, displaying architectural renderings, landscaping schedules, lighting layouts, irrigation plans, and future recreational facilities. Near the end of the presentation, one consultant explained that maintaining a consistent water elevation throughout every season would be essential for protecting shoreline investments and preserving the appearance of the completed project. I quietly wrote that sentence into my notebook before underlining it twice. After the meeting concluded, I approached the consultant and asked a simple question. Who prepared the hydraulic operating assumptions for maintaining those water elevations? He paused for a moment before admitting that his team had relied upon historical operating conditions already established at the reservoir. I thanked him politely and wished everyone a pleasant evening. I never mentioned that those historical operating conditions existed because someone had carefully managed the dam for decades according to engineering manuals sitting inside my control building. The following morning, I drove to the county records office carrying my certified ownership documents along with several historical engineering drawings. My goal was not to challenge anyone. I simply wanted to verify that every recorded easement, operational right, maintenance responsibility, and property description matched the current public record exactly. The clerk carefully reviewed each document before printing updated certified copies reflecting every recorded instrument associated with the structure. Every page confirmed the same conclusion. Ownership of the dam remained legally separate from ownership of the surrounding common areas managed by the association. The maintenance easements remained active. Operational responsibilities remained attached to the structure itself. Nothing about the subdivision's later development had altered those recorded facts. I left the courthouse with an even thicker folder than the one I had carried inside. That afternoon, I returned to the control building and spread every document across the old wooden workbench where my father had once reviewed inspection reports. Original blueprints rested beside modern surveys. Maintenance logs aligned perfectly with engineering diagrams. Recorded deeds matched easement maps down to the smallest measurements. Piece by piece, decades of history connected into one complete picture that required no interpretation because the documents explained everything themselves. As evening settled across the ridge, I scanned every newly certified record into multiple digital archives before storing the originals inside a fire-resistant cabinet. I also created a chronological index linking each legal document with inspection records, photographs, meeting minutes, newsletters, and public statements made by the association over the previous several months. The collection had quietly evolved into something much larger than a property file. It had become the complete history of how the lake functioned, who maintained the infrastructure supporting it, and why every future decision concerning the reservoir depended upon understanding the system upstream before making promises downstream. Outside, the lake reflected another peaceful Texas sunset, while families continued walking along the shoreline completely unaware of the quiet preparation taking place above them. Linda Parker remained focused on expanding the community's vision around the water. I remained focused on preserving every fact surrounding the structure that made the water possible. Sooner or later, those two paths would meet, and when they did, The conversation would not be decided by opinions or assumptions. It would be decided by carefully preserved records, engineering history, and the simple legal truth that had been waiting patiently behind one locked steel door all along. The turning point arrived on an ordinary Tuesday morning, not with flashing lights or raised voices, but with 3 white government pickup trucks slowly climbing the maintenance road toward the dam. I noticed them just after sunrise while completing my weekly inspection of the spillway. Each vehicle carried engineering equipment instead of construction materials. Survey tripods, measuring rods, waterproof instrument cases, and rolled drawings filled the truck beds. The visitors stepped out wearing reflective safety vests with agency identification clipped neatly to their shirts. They greeted me professionally and introduced themselves as engineers and inspectors conducting a scheduled infrastructure review connected to historical operating records that had recently been verified through county filings and archive documentation. I welcomed them inside the control building and unlocked every cabinet my father had taught me to organize with absolute precision. One inspector smiled quietly when he saw maintenance logs stretching back decades without significant gaps. Another carefully compared the original hydraulic drawings against modern digital surveys displayed on a tablet computer. The lead engineer asked whether the gate mechanisms had been modified since the original installation. I explained every maintenance project completed over the years and provided invoices, inspection reports, replacement part records, and engineering certifications documenting each improvement. The conversation remained calm because nobody was trying to prove a point. They were simply confirming facts. Outside, additional survey specialists positioned equipment across the crest of the dam, measuring elevations, verifying benchmarks, and recording structural dimensions that matched the original construction drawings with remarkable accuracy. By mid-morning, several contractors working near the shoreline noticed the unusual activity above them. Within an hour, Linda Parker arrived accompanied by 2 board members and the project's consulting engineer. She walked toward the inspectors with the same confidence I had seen at countless association meetings, although this time curiosity had replaced celebration. She politely introduced herself and asked whether there was anything the association could provide to assist the inspection. The lead engineer thanked her courteously before explaining that the review concerned the dam itself, its operational documentation, historical ownership records, and the infrastructure supporting reservoir management. Linda glanced toward me for only a brief moment before returning her attention to the officials. I could almost see the question forming in her mind. Why had nobody mentioned this review to the association first? The answer rested inside the certified ownership documents already recorded months earlier. Throughout the afternoon, the inspection continued with remarkable patience. Every valve assembly was examined. Every gate control was tested without altering normal water levels. Survey measurements were compared against archived engineering plans preserved inside the control building. The inspectors photographed identification plates attached to mechanical equipment that had remained in service for generations. They asked thoughtful questions about routine maintenance schedules, seasonal inspections, and operating procedures. I answered each one using the same records my father had taught me never to discard. Late in the day, the lead engineer gathered everyone near the overlook above the spillway. He explained that the documentation provided a clear operational history and confirmed that the dam remained a separately owned and independently maintained infrastructure asset supporting the reservoir. He spoke carefully, avoiding legal conclusions beyond the scope of the inspection, yet one sentence quietly changed the atmosphere surrounding the entire project. The reservoir functions because this structure continues to operate according to its documented engineering responsibilities. Nobody argued with him because there was nothing to argue about. The maps, maintenance logs, certified deeds, inspection records, and engineering drawings all described the same reality. As the government vehicles departed beneath the warm Texas sunset, I watched Linda remain standing near the control building for several silent moments, looking not toward the beautiful lake below, but upstream at the weathered concrete structure she had overlooked from the very beginning. For the first time since our paths had crossed, she was no longer admiring the water. She was finally looking at what had always controlled it. The days following the inspection felt remarkably different, even though almost nothing visible had changed around the lake. The walking trails remained open, the fishing docks stayed busy, and every evening families continued gathering beside the water to watch the sunset. From a distance, Willow Ridge looked exactly as it always had. Yet beneath that familiar routine, the conversations had quietly shifted. Instead of discussing new landscaping or future festivals, residents began asking careful questions about the inspection vehicles they had seen parked beside the dam. Some wondered whether maintenance was being upgraded. Others assumed additional permits were required before the next phase of shoreline improvements could begin. I never corrected anyone. The answers would arrive through official channels soon enough. A week later, the Homeowners Association scheduled another community meeting. Linda Parker stood before a full room of homeowners. But this time, there were no colorful renderings or promises about completion dates. A single agenda item appeared on the screen behind her concerning infrastructure coordination and operational responsibilities related to the reservoir. Her voice remained calm and professional as she explained that recent engineering reviews had identified historical ownership records requiring additional coordination before certain expansion projects could continue. She avoided dramatic language, choosing every word with obvious care. No one interrupted her. The room listened quietly because everyone sensed the conversation had moved beyond ordinary neighborhood planning. After the meeting ended, Linda approached me near the parking lot instead of walking directly toward the board members as she usually did. She looked tired, not defeated, simply thoughtful. I never realized the dam had always been separate, she admitted. I nodded politely. Most people never do, I answered. She looked back toward the lake before asking another question. Why did you never mention any of this earlier? I smiled gently because the answer had been with me since childhood. Because documents speak more clearly than arguments. She stood silently for a moment before thanking me for the conversation. There was no hostility between us anymore. Only a quiet recognition that both of us had been looking at the same lake from completely different directions. During the following days, engineers, attorneys, and planners revised several project proposals using the documentation gathered during the inspection. Shoreline improvements continued to be evaluated, but every discussion now began with one simple requirement. The operational needs of the dam came first. That single change reshaped every planning meeting without anyone raising their voice. Contractors adjusted layouts to preserve maintenance access. Landscape architects modified designs around existing easements. Event planners updated future schedules to accommodate inspection periods and operational responsibilities. The structure that had once been ignored suddenly became the first subject discussed before any new decision was made. One evening, I climbed onto the crest of the dam, carrying my father's weathered notebook. I sat on the same concrete wall, where we had shared countless quiet afternoons together, and slowly turned through pages filled with his careful handwriting. Water elevations, inspection dates, rainfall measurements, replacement parts, seasonal observations. Every line reflected the same patient discipline he had practiced throughout his life. Looking across the calm reservoir, I realized he had never been trying to teach me how to own a dam. He had been teaching me how to respect responsibility before authority. The distinction mattered more than ever now. As the last light faded across the Texas sky, the lake reflected shades of gold and deep blue, while the old steel gates continued doing exactly what they had always done. They served the community without seeking attention. In that quiet moment, I understood the real victory had never been proving who owned the structure. It was helping everyone finally understand why the overlooked foundation upstream deserved the same respect as the beautiful water stretching peacefully below. Several months passed before the community finally settled into a new routine, and by then the lake looked almost exactly as it had before the ambitious expansion plans began. The shoreline remained beautiful. Children still skipped stones across the calm water on warm evenings, and fishermen gathered before sunrise hoping for a quiet start to the day. The difference was not something anyone could photograph. It existed inside every planning meeting, every engineering review, and every decision involving the reservoir. The dam was no longer treated as an afterthought hidden beyond the trees. It had become the first item discussed before any proposal moved forward. Maintenance access remained protected, operational schedules were coordinated with community events, and engineering reviews became standard practice rather than forgotten formalities. Linda Parker adapted to the change with far more grace than many people expected. During one board meeting, she publicly thanked the engineers, inspectors, and historical records that had helped everyone better understand the infrastructure supporting the lake. She never tried to rewrite the past or pretend the misunderstanding had never happened. Instead, she acknowledged that the community had learned an important lesson about respecting every part of the system instead of only the portions people could easily see. I respected that. Admitting a mistake without creating excuses requires a different kind of strength than winning an argument. Not long afterward, she stopped by the control building carrying 2 cups of coffee just before sunrise. We stood together overlooking the reservoir while morning mist drifted slowly across the water. She smiled toward the lake before looking back at the weathered concrete beneath our feet. "I spent years believing the shoreline was the heart of this place," she said quietly. "Now I realize the heart has been standing under us the entire time." I nodded, accepting the coffee with a grateful smile. "The lake has always deserved good stewardship," I replied. "So has everything holding it together." We stood in comfortable silence for several minutes, listening to water flowing gently through the spillway while birds crossed the brightening sky. There was no celebration, no dramatic victory, and no desire to remind anyone who legally owned the structure. The documents had already accomplished everything they needed to accomplish. From that day forward, every routine inspection continued exactly as my father had taught me decades earlier. I measured water elevations, checked drainage channels, reviewed gate mechanisms, and recorded every observation inside the same style of maintenance log he once carried beneath his arm. The responsibility never felt like a burden because it had never truly been about ownership. It had always been about preserving something larger than myself for everyone who depended upon it without even realizing it. Sometimes I still walk to the crest of the dam just before sunset and look across the quiet lake as golden light reflects from the water toward the distant hills. Families laugh along the shoreline, neighbors wave from passing boats, and children chase ducks exactly as they did before any of this began. They enjoy the beauty of the lake without thinking about the machinery quietly working upstream, and I believe that is exactly how it should be. The greatest infrastructure is often the kind people never notice because it simply continues doing its job every single day. My father once told me that people admire what they can see, but depend upon what they often overlook. Standing there now, with one hand resting on the weathered steel railing that has watched over generations before me, I finally understand what he meant. The lake never belonged to the loudest voice standing beside it. It belonged to careful stewardship, patient preparation, and the quiet responsibility of the person trusted to open the gates only when the time was right.